Hercule Poirot is drawn into the glittering world of the opera when a star's mask is found cracked beside a sudden death. Behind the elegance of the stage, he uncovers jealousy, betrayal, and a murderer hiding in plain sight. Chapter 1. The inciting incident. Opera house was suffused with the sharp scent of roses and the low hum of eager anticipation. The patrons, draped in elegant evening gowns and tailored tuxedos, chattered lightly as the final strains of the orchestra echoed through the grand hall. A luminous chandelier hung like a beacon of wealth and refinement, casting its warm glow upon the gathered throng. The night's performance was a much-anticipated gala event and exclusive show, meant to elevate the reputation of the opera house, and indeed, the city itself. But for all its pomp and ceremony, the evening would not end in applause, but in scandal. The performance had just reached the climactic scene, the moment where the lead soprano, Victoria Devereux, adorned in her signature crimson dress and an intricate golden mask, took the stage for her final aria. The audience was mesmerized, her voice soaring to meet the opulence of the evening. It was during this crescendo, in the midst of her ethereal performance, that a strange crack reverberated through the air, a sharp sound that broke through the music. Like a thunderclap, cutting into the beauty of the moment, the audience, initially unsure of what they had heard, turned toward the stage. But it was not the orchestra's instruments that had created this sound, it was the mask that Victoria wore. The crimson opera mask, a piece of legend in its own right, had shattered. The delicate porcelain fell apart in pieces, cascading to the floor as the soprano froze, her once perfect composure slipping. In a mere heartbeat, she clutched her face, as if trying to preserve the shattered remnants of her identity. But the scene turned even more unnerving as the audience realized what had occurred in the aftermath. The mask, once an integral symbol of Victoria's stage persona, had not cracked due to some unfortunate accident or flaw in its design. No, upon closer inspection, it became apparent that it had been cracked deliberately. A fine and deliberate break along the edge. But who could have done this and why? As the confusion rippled through the theater, a moment of terror gripped the crowd. Victoria had collapsed onto the stage, her body crumpling like a discarded doll. An audible gasp ran through the opera house, the lively whispers turning into anxious murmurs. The curtain was drawn hastily, the lights dimmed, and the audience was asked to remain seated as matters of security were quickly being handled. A sense of unease settled over the room. Outside, in the shadows of the stage entrance, the renowned Belgian detective, Hercule Poirot, stood observing. He had arrived at the opera house only minutes before the catastrophe, invited as an honored guest for the gala evening. The whispers and rustling crowd hadn't escaped his keen ears. The mask's dramatic fall had unsettled him. It was no accident, of that he was certain. Mon ami, Poirot murmured softly to himself, adjusting the bodie that seemed to always sit perfectly on his neck. There's something more to this than mere chance. Soon, Poirot found himself inside the opera house's private rooms, where he was joined by the authorities. A surgeon had already attended to the singer, but the doctor's grave expression only deepened the mystery. Victoria Devereux, unconscious and pale, had suffered a severe shock, but more disturbingly, there were signs of something far more sinister. As Poirot surveyed the scene, he was approached by the opera house's manager, a tall man named Edward Beaumont. His face was tight, his eyes darting nervously. He extended his hand to Poirot, but Poirot, with his customary grace, waved it off and began to speak before the man could offer his greetings. You are concerned about the damage to your opera house's reputation, I understand, Monsieur Beaumont. But this is far from a simple matter of shattered glass, Poirot said, his tone precise and cool. The mask was not broken by an unfortunate accident. It was destroyed purposefully, skillfully, and with intent. Someone has orchestrated this moment with careful calculation. Beaumont swallowed hard, his face turning a shade paler. He glanced nervously toward the dressing room door where Victoria lay. But how? Why would someone want to harm Victoria in this way? The masket is just a prop, surely? A prop, yes, Poirot replied with a quiet, almost teasing smile, but one that carries meaning. A mask, Monsieur Beaumont, conceals, and it is in the concealed that we shall find the truth. Who stands to gain from this disgrace? Who had the opportunity to carry out such a move? Beaumont, fumbling with his cufflinks, began to list a series of names, people who had motive. It seemed, but none who truly stood out in Poirot's discerning eye. Poirot's mind whirred. Every detail, no matter how small, had its place. He had been at this theater for but an hour, yet already his little gray cells were beginning to turn over the possibilities. A list of suspects was taking shape in his mind, though the puzzle pieces had yet to fully align. Yet one thing was clear: this was no random act. Poirot turned to face the stage where the shattered pieces of the mask lay, surrounded by the hushed voices of the authorities and the growing fear in the air. There was one question, in particular, that Poirot was determined to answer. Who would crack the mask, and why? As Poirot left the dressing room to speak further with the witnesses and suspects, his sharp eyes locked onto the lead actor, Geoffrey Halliday, who appeared nervous as he shifted away from the group. Poirot's curiosity was piqued, for in his years of experience, it was often the most visible suspects who hid the most secrets. He would speak with Geoffrey next. The mystery of the cracked mask was only just beginning. Chapter 2. The first clue. Poirot made his way across the dimly lit hallway of the opera house, his small but precise steps echoing against the cold marble floor. His mind was already racing, each detail adding another layer to the puzzle. As he reached the dressing rooms, his eyes caught the faint glint of the shattered mask still scattered across the floor. The fragments, once beautiful and whole, were now strewn in a pattern that hinted at deliberate destruction. A soft rustling came from behind the closed door. The voices of the opera house's staff could be heard, murmuring anxiously. Poirot gave a short knock, and at the sound of a muffled reply, he stepped inside, his presence immediately commanding attention. The small room smelled faintly of perfume, leather, and something more unsettling. Fear. Inside. The first thing Poirot noticed was the faintly trembling figure of Victoria Devereux. She was seated at her vanity, her face pale and drawn. She had been tended to by the doctor, but her eyes held a far-off look, as if she were still trying to process what had occurred. The mask, a symbol of her carefully crafted persona, had been destroyed at the height of her performance, an act that now lay heavy in the room. Like a thick fog, Poirot's gaze flicked to the other occupants of the room. Edward Beaumont stood in the corner, his expression tight with worry. A young stagehand, a boy no older than 16, was standing near the door, clutching a bundle of Victoria's belongings in his hands. The doctor, an older man named Dr. William Grayson, was checking the patient's pulse. "Is she well?" Poirot asked, his voice cutting through the tension. The doctor looked up, his brow furrowed. "She's conscious now, though I suspect the shock has caused more than just a physical reaction. Her heart rate is irregular, and her body is reacting to stress." "And the mask?" Poirot prompted, his eyes narrowing. "The shattered mask. It was not an accident." Beaumont shifted uneasily, his face turning a shade paler at the mention of the mask. He cleared his throat before replying. It must have been a simple mistake, perhaps an unfortunate movement on stage, a collision, or... Poirot raised a hand, silencing him with an almost imperceptible gesture. "No, Monsieur Beaumont, you do not understand." His voice was calm but unwavering. "The mask was deliberately broken, and if it were an accident, it would have been a rare one indeed. There was a purpose behind this. Someone intended for it to fall apart, Beaumont stiffened, but said nothing further. Shifting his gaze to the floor, Poirot's sharp eyes returned to the fragments of the mask scattered across the room. He took a step closer, bending down to inspect the pieces carefully. His trained eye took in every detail: the texture of the porcelain, the way it had cracked, and the odd absence of any small fragments. It was as though something had been removed, something that should have been there. "This is no accident," Poirot murmured to himself. Someone knew exactly how to break this. Victoria, whose eyes had been unfocused until now, finally spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "What do you mean?" she asked, her voice laced with both fear and confusion. "Who would do such a thing?" "It was only a mask." Poirot straightened, his eyes fixed on hers with the intense focus that he was known for. "Madame Devereux, there is more to this mask than meets the eye. It was no random accident. The fracture was not simply from force, it was from knowledge. Someone knew precisely how to crack it, and they did so deliberately, like a message or a warning." Victoria blinked, as if the weight of his words had yet to fully reach her. But Poirot's gaze had already moved on to the next clue. He turned to the young stagehand, who was still nervously holding onto Victoria's belongings. The boy shifted from foot to foot, clearly uncomfortable under Poirot's penetrating gaze. "Mon ami," Poirot said, his tone soft but probing, "what do you know of the mask?" The boy's face paled even further. "I don't know, sir," he stammered. "I mean, I've only ever seen it backstage when Madame Devereux wears it. It's always kept in her dressing room." "I don't think anyone has ever—" "Yes," Poirot interrupted gently, "but someone has, none? Someone has touched it recently, perhaps more than you realize." The boy swallowed hard, his eyes darting to Beaumont for reassurance. "No, sir. I swear I've only—" Poirot stepped closer, his voice low and insistent. "You must understand, mon petit, nothing is as it seems. A small piece of porcelain holds the key to everything. Tell me, did anyone seem out of sorts before the performance? Anyone who might have had a reason to damage this mask?" The boy hesitated, looking back at Beaumont, but Poirot's unwavering gaze left him with no choice but to speak. I didn't want to say anything, but there was someone. Geoffrey Halliday, the lead actor. He came backstage just before the performance. He was angry. He was shouting about something, but I didn't know what it was about. I didn't think it was important." Poirot's eyes gleamed with interest. "Geoffrey Halliday," he repeated, as if savoring the name. "Interesting. He too is a part of this puzzle." Victoria, whose attention had been wandering, stiffened at the mention of Halliday. "Geoffrey?" she asked, her voice tight with uncertainty. "But what would he have to do with this?" "Geoffrey and I—" Poirot cut her off with a raised hand. "Madame Devereux, I assure you, there is no need to speculate just yet. But Monsieur Halliday's presence here is no coincidence. We shall examine his actions and words more closely in time." Turning to the others in the room, Poirot added, "I shall need to speak to Monsieur Halliday at once. He holds a key, I believe." The tension in the room thickened as Poirot's words hung in the air. There were more secrets to uncover, more motives to unearth. And the pieces of the puzzle, although slowly falling into place, still left the detective with many questions. The first clues had been discovered, but Poirot knew this was only the beginning. Chapter 3. The Gathering of Suspects. Poirot's sharp gaze never wavered. As he took his leave of Victoria's dressing room, with one last glance at the bewildered stagehand, he gave a brief nod to the doctor, who had remained largely silent throughout the exchange. Dr. Grayson, his brow furrowed, made a gesture of helplessness as Poirot turned to exit. "Is there nothing more I can do, Monsieur Poirot?" the doctor asked, his voice tinged with frustration. Poirot paused, a smile curving at the edges of his lips, though there was little warmth in it. "Mon ami, you have done your part. The body is in good hands, and the mind must now do its work." I need not your medical skills but your discretion. I have a task for you. Inform no one of what I know, not yet. Let the mystery play out in its own time, without waiting for a response. Poirot exited the room, stepping back into the hallway, where the sound of the opera still resonated faintly. Though the atmosphere had shifted drastically, the night was no longer about enjoyment. It was now a game of shadows and whispers. Poirot's mind was already at work, turning over the information he had gathered so far. He needed to speak to Geoffrey Halliday, the lead actor who had been so angrily present before the performance. He needed to understand the reasons behind the tension, to see if his words matched his actions. But that could wait. First, he had a gathering to arrange. In the grand lobby, the murmur of voices hushed when Poirot entered. His presence was always noted, always recognized. And tonight it was as if the walls themselves leaned in to hear his next move. The guests, previously caught in the thrill of the evening's entertainment, now stood poised between curiosity and concern, awaiting some kind of explanation. Poirot walked toward the group of staff and performers assembled near the grand staircase. Among them, he found Edward Beaumont, standing as rigid as ever. Geoffrey Halliday, his hands folded stiffly in front of him, was next to him, an air of unease surrounding him. The other suspects were clustered around, watching Poirot with a mix of suspicion and intrigue. Monsieur Beaumont, Poirot began, his voice cutting through the murmur of the gathering. I request that everyone stay where they are for the moment. You see, I must ask you all a question, and this, I believe, will be the key to understanding what has truly occurred this evening. Beaumont nodded, though his hands trembled slightly. Of course, Monsieur Poirot, we are at your disposal. Poirot's eyes flicked over the group. Every one of them appeared calm on the surface, but Poirot could see the signs. The way Halliday's eyes darted nervously, the subtle tension in the shoulders of the woman who had been sitting near the front row of the opera house. Each person carried the weight of their own secrets. It was a closed circle, and in Poirot's experience, that was precisely when the truth was the most elusive. He turned to Halliday first, his voice like a velvet hammer. Monsieur Halliday, Poirot said, his tone light but firm. I understand you were quite upset earlier, yes? Halliday stiffened, his jaw tightening as he responded. Upset? I was simply anxious. It's an important night, Monsieur Poirot, and the pressure of such a performance can cause moments of discontent. Poirot studied him carefully, reading the subtle movements of his body, the actor's stiff posture, his refusal to meet Poirot's eyes directly. It was all there, in plain sight. But Poirot said nothing. He let the silence stretch for a moment too long before speaking again. You are a man of passion, Monsieur Halliday, Poirot observed. Perhaps you were more than just anxious. Perhaps there was a deeper reason for your agitation tonight. Halliday opened his mouth as if to respond, then closed it, his eyes flicking to Beaumont for a brief second. Beaumont, seeing the exchange, stepped in, clearly anxious to protect his performer. Geoffrey is simply a bit sensitive, Beaumont interjected, his tone rushed. He's a perfectionist, you know. The performance was crucial, and, well, emotions can sometimes run high in such a setting. Poirot's eyes remained fixed on the actor, though his voice turned to one of gentle persuasion. Perhaps, Monsieur Beaumont, but it is rarely a matter of simple anxiety when such drastic actions are taken. No, Monsieur Halliday, I think there is more to your frustration tonight. Tell me, have you ever disagreed with the lady who wears the mask, the woman who is now in the hospital? Your co-star, Madame Devereux? Halliday stiffened, his jaw visibly clenching. I don't know what you're insinuating, Poirot, he snapped. I respect Madame Devereux immensely. Any quarrels we've had were between two professionals, nothing more. Poirot's eyes glimmered with the quiet satisfaction of knowing he had touched a nerve. He turned his attention away from Halliday for a moment, scanning the other individuals gathered. There were more pressing matters at hand, he spoke again, this time to a woman standing slightly apart from the others. She was dressed in a deep blue gown, her dark eyes sharp and calculating. "Madame Bellamy," Poirot said, his voice softer now, almost casual. "You were one of the first to arrive, I believe." Madame Bellamy, the opera's longtime prima donna and former rival to Victoria Devereux, gave him a tight smile. "Yes, Monsieur Poirot. But what does that have to do with the events tonight?" Poirot tilted his head, observing her with his usual intensity. "It's simple, Madame Bellamy. You arrived early, yes, and I must wonder, did you happen to overhear anything? A conversation between the two stars, perhaps? Some tension, some exchange of words that might have hinted at a deeper conflict?" Bellamy's lips pressed into a thin line, but she made no response. Her gaze shifted slightly, a subtle glance at Halliday before returning to Poirot. Though it was clear she was holding something back, Poirot's mind was ticking, the pieces of the puzzle slowly coming into focus. These people, with their carefully crafted appearances and polished facades, were hiding something, he was sure of it. But what? "Do not worry, Madame Bellamy," Poirot said with a reassuring smile. "I will not press you just yet. But remember this, one day, you will regret holding onto the truth when it is time to let it go." The room grew quieter, the tension building with every passing second. It was clear that Poirot had only just begun peeling back the layers. The secrets were there, buried beneath the surface, and Poirot would uncover them one by one. But as he turned his attention to the next suspect, he knew the web of lies was far more intricate than he had anticipated. The investigation was only just beginning, and the truth was still a shadow, waiting to be brought into the light. Chapter 4. Poirot arrived at the Opera House was now bathed in a quiet tension, the kind that hangs in the air when everyone knows something terrible has occurred, but none are willing to speak it aloud. The lights had dimmed for a moment. The crowd's whispers now hushed as the guests were corralled into the main hall. Poirot stood at the edge of the gathering, his coat perfectly tailored, his mustache in its usual immaculate form. From the moment he had entered the grand room, there had been no mistaking his rival. The presence of the detective was like a weight in the atmosphere, an unseen force that immediately commanded attention. The murmur of the gathering shifted, some standing straighter, some lowering their voices. Poirot, however, was not concerned with their perceptions. His focus was clear, and it was on the suspects, each one of them. Carefully assembled like pieces on a chessboard, he looked over the assembled group one more time, letting his eyes flit from each face, absorbing their expressions. He knew already that the answers were within the people themselves, that they held the pieces of the puzzle that had yet to be fully revealed. There were layers to every individual, and Poirot intended to peel those layers back with the precision of his sharp intellect. The first to break the silence was Edward Beaumont, the manager of the Opera House, his face a study of restrained anxiety. He approached Poirot slowly, his footsteps echoing slightly on the marble floor. "Monsieur Poirot," Beaumont began, his voice a little shaky, "I trust you will find all the answers tonight. We cannot afford for this scandal to grow any larger. The performance, the prestige of the entire house, it all depends on our discretion. Surely you understand?" Poirot gave a slight nod, his eyes never leaving Beaumont's face. "Ah, but Monsieur Beaumont," he replied softly, "discretion can often be the very thing that hides the truth, and the truth, you see, is a stubborn thing. It cannot be silenced, no matter how much one might wish it to be so." Beaumont shifted uncomfortably, but Poirot did not give him the opportunity to respond. His attention had already moved on to Geoffrey Halliday, who stood a few feet away, his posture now more rigid than ever, his hands clenched into fists at his sides. "Ah, Monsieur Halliday," Poirot said, his voice light but full of hidden intent. "I see you are still with us. How fortunate. Perhaps you can explain to me the nature of your agitation earlier." What prompted your behavior before the performance?" Halliday's jaw tightened, but he made no immediate reply. The actor's gaze shifted toward Beaumont once more, as if seeking permission to speak. Poirot could almost hear the unspoken conversation between them, the silent tension between the two men. Beaumont stepped forward, his voice clipped. "Geoffrey has had a long-standing issue with the arrangements tonight. His performance, his reputation, they all hang in the balance. The mask shattering was simply the last straw for him. It's nothing more than nerves, Poirot. Really." Poirot tilted his head slightly, his eyes narrowing. "Nerves, you say?" His tone softened, almost as if he were speaking to a child. "But Monsieur Halliday is an actor of great experience, no? He has faced countless audiences, stood on stage under far more pressure than tonight. I do not believe it was merely nerves, Monsieur Beaumont. I believe it was something else, something deeper." Halliday, visibly uncomfortable under the scrutiny, finally spoke, his voice stiff. "I don't know what you mean," he said, his gaze never quite meeting Poirot's. "It was just, well, the mask. It's a cursed thing, that mask. It's always been trouble. I was simply trouble." Poirot interjected sharply. "Is that how you see it? A mere object? Or is it more than that? Perhaps you see the mask as something else. A symbol, perhaps? A reminder of something you'd rather forget?" There was a flicker in Halliday's eyes, the faintest crack in his carefully constructed forehead. He opened his mouth to speak again, but faltered, his lips trembling for just a moment before he closed them once more. Poirot's gaze softened, but his voice remained firm. "You are lying, Monsieur Halliday. But I do not think you are the one who broke the mask. No, that was the work of someone far more calculating than you." Halliday's face flushed, and he took an involuntary step back. It was clear from the way he looked at Beaumont that there were things. He was not willing to share things he feared. Poirot turned away from Halliday, his eyes now sweeping over the rest of the group. The others, though outwardly composed, were subtly watching him, awaiting his next move. Among them, Poirot caught sight of Madame Bellamy, her eyes fixed on the floor as if she had something to hide. She was not as unaffected by the situation as she had tried to appear. He approached her slowly, the faintest of smiles playing on his lips. "Madame Bellamy," Poirot began, his voice gentle but probing, "I have heard that you were once the star of this opera house. A star, I am sure, who did not like sharing the limelight. Perhaps when Madame Devereux began to eclipse you, it caused you some discomfort?" Bellamy's gaze snapped up, her eyes flashing with indignation. "How dare you?" she spat, stepping forward, her hands trembling slightly. "I am here because I am a professional, Monsieur Poirot. I have no interest in petty rivalries. Your insinuations are beneath you." Poirot's smile deepened ever so slightly. "Ah, but madam, you misunderstand me. I do not accuse you of anything just yet. But sometimes, even the most professional of us hold grudges. And it is these grudges, these buried emotions, that are often the key to understanding a crime." The tension in the room grew thick, the air now crackling with barely contained secrets. Each suspect carried their own burden, their own fears. But Poirot could see through it all, the cracks in their facades, the subtle signs that told him more than they realized. As he continued his silent inspection of the room, Poirot knew the time was coming when he would need to confront them all. The truth was close, but it would not reveal itself easily. Every layer of deception had to be peeled back carefully. With a final glance at the group, Poirot spoke again, his tone almost serene. "But no matter, we shall have time for questions later. For now, I must observe. I must watch carefully how you all react, and perhaps, just perhaps, one of you will reveal more than you intend." And so, with that, the game continued, each moment a step closer to the final revelation, each gesture a potential clue that would ultimately unravel the tangled web before them. The night was far from over. and Poirot knew that it would take every ounce of his skill to uncover the truth buried beneath layers of deception. Chapter 5. Initial Interviews. The atmosphere in the opera house had shifted from nervous whispers to a tense silence. As the gathering began to disperse, the suspects, no longer in their glamorous attire, but dressed more plainly now in the aftermath of the disaster, were assembled in a small, private room on the second floor. It was a room with large windows that overlooked the city, but no one seemed to notice the view. Each person was consumed by their own inner turmoil. Poirot had gathered them there not only to observe, but to begin his careful examination. The game was now afoot, and the first step was to understand their motives. Poirot stood before them, arms crossed with a slight smile playing on his lips. He had observed their behavior at the opera, their subtle movements and reactions. But now it was time for the interrogation. He was ready to ask the questions that would reveal the cracks in their stories. Now, Poirot began, his voice calm but authoritative. "We shall begin our interviews. You, who were present when the mask was destroyed. You who witnessed the event, each of you will speak, and I shall listen." He gestured to the first person, Geoffrey Halliday, still on edge, his posture stiff. Halliday had taken a seat near the back, trying to blend into the shadows. But Poirot's eyes were sharp and never missed a thing. "Monsieur Halliday," Poirot said, his voice cutting through the silence, "you will begin. I must know what happened before the mask fell. What were you doing? What did you see?" "Do not worry. I will listen." Halliday hesitated, his eyes flicking to Beaumont and then to Madame Bellamy. The silence grew oppressive, but Poirot did not rush him. He waited, watching, until Halliday finally spoke. "I told you, I was upset. The mask—" He stopped himself abruptly, as if the words caught in his throat. "It's ridiculous," he muttered, shaking his head. "I'm sorry, Monsieur Poirot. I was just angry about the pressure, the performance, everything. When I saw the mask crack, it only added to the frustration." Poirot observed him closely, noting the slight tremor in his hands as Halliday clutched the armrests of his chair. "You did not break the mask, Monsieur Halliday?" Poirot asked, his voice probing. Halliday stiffened, a quick, defensive response on his lips, but then he hesitated. "No," he said after a beat, "I did not. I would never, of course," Poirot said, cutting him off with a wave of his hand. "But we shall continue, Monsieur Halliday. I will speak with you again soon. Let us move on for now." Halliday nodded, visibly relieved. But Poirot's sharp eyes were already on the next suspect. Beaumont stood rigidly at the far side of the room, his hands clasped in front of him, his eyes darting nervously between the others. Poirot turned his attention to him next. "Monsieur Beaumont," Poirot addressed him directly, "you are the manager of this establishment. Surely you have seen many performances, many masks, and many events. But this was different. A crime was committed tonight, was it not?" Beaumont swallowed hard, his face turning pale as Poirot's words seemed to hang in the air like a cloud of impending judgment. He was clearly rattled. "I don't understand. What crime?" "The mask broke. Yes, but it was an accident." Poirot raised a hand, stopping him before he could continue. "Accident, you say? You are the manager, Monsieur Beaumont. You know the importance of the mask. You know the meaning it holds for the performer. And you know that accidents like this do not just happen on their own. Someone intended for that mask to fall. And you know it." Beaumont's lips pressed together in a tight line, his eyes avoiding Poirot's gaze. I don't know anything about that," he muttered, his voice shaky. Not what, Monsieur Beaumont?" Poirot interrupted again. "Not involved. But you were here, in the heart of it all. The pressure, the tensions, the personal conflicts, you are no stranger to them. Were you not the one who organized the performance tonight? Who made certain that everything went according to plan?" Beaumont's shoulders slumped as if the weight of the interrogation was too much for him. He looked toward the others, his face flushed with discomfort. I did my best, Monsieur Poirot, but there are so many things I don't control. The performers. Poirot pressed, his eyes narrowing. You control the theater, the audience, the very atmosphere in which they perform. What about your relationships with them, Monsieur Beaumont? Surely you've had your own share of conflicts behind closed doors? Beaumont's gaze dropped to the floor, avoiding the probing eyes of the detective. Poirot knew then that the man was hiding something, but for now, he moved on. Thank you, Monsieur Beaumont, Poirot said, his voice as smooth as silk. We shall return to you later. Poirot's eyes turned to the next person in line, Madame Bellamy, the former star of the opera house. She had been unusually quiet during the exchanges, her face still painted with the calm, controlled mask of a professional actress. But Poirot could see the edges of tension in her posture. He could see the cracks in her composure. Madame Bellamy, Poirot began, his voice polite but firm. You are no stranger to the stage. You have been in this theater longer than anyone, and yet you stand in the shadows of Madame Devereux. Tell me, how does that feel, to see someone rise to the position you once held? The question, direct and pointed, made Madame Bellamy flinch. Her lips pressed together, her eyes narrowing. She took a deep breath before answering. I am a professional, Monsieur Poirot. I have no qualms with Victoria, she said, her voice icy and controlled. I am not concerned with her success. I am here because this is my job, and nothing more. Poirot studied her intently, his mind clicking into place. He saw the small trembling of her hands, the way she refused to meet anyone's gaze for too long, the subtle shift in her posture when she spoke of Victoria. This was no simple rival, this was personal. Ah, Madame Bellamy, Poirot said softly, almost to himself, the truth will come out, I assure you. But for now, I will leave you in peace. He turned away from her, his thoughts already turning over the details. The interviews had begun, and while they had yet to yield any direct confessions, the cracks were beginning to show. He knew that in time, the truth would rise to the surface, and he would be there to catch it before it slipped away. The mystery of the cracked opera mask was far from over, and Poirot knew the heart of the crime was hidden just beneath the surface, waiting to be unearthed. Chapter 6. First false. The room grew quiet as Poirot surveyed the suspects, each one more anxious than the last. He had already seen through the surface-level deflections, but the deeper truths remained hidden. The evening's events, wrapped in confusion and deceit, had only begun to unfold. Poirot knew the pieces were there, scattered in plain sight. It was time to begin the delicate work of picking them apart. Monsieur Halliday, Poirot began, his voice calm but direct. You are an actor, a man used to the spotlight, but tonight you have been caught in a moment of discomfort. Your actions before the performance, they were more than just nerves, were they not? Halliday shifted in his chair, his posture stiffening. I've told you, Poirot, I was simply frustrated, he said, his voice defensive. The performance, the pressure, it was all too much. Poirot stepped forward, his eyes narrowing slightly. The pressure, yes. But what of the mask, Monsieur Halliday? Why did you appear so agitated when it shattered? You must admit, the timing was rather convenient. Halliday's eyes darted nervously to Beaumont, then to Madame Bellamy. I told you, he repeated, his words more forced now. I had nothing to do with it. The mask was a symbol, a part of the act, nothing more. Poirot studied him silently for a moment before speaking again. But a symbol can mean much more than what we see on the surface. And you, Monsieur Halliday, were deeply affected by its destruction, more than the others. Why? Halliday opened his mouth to respond, but hesitated. For a brief moment, he seemed unsure of himself. I don't know, he muttered, lowering his gaze. I guess it just set me off, that's all. Poirot gave him a long look. but he moved on. There was something Halliday wasn't saying, but now was not the time to press. The puzzle had more pieces yet to be discovered. Madame Bellamy, Poirot addressed the former star, turning his attention to her with a measured calm. You have been in the theater longer than anyone. You've witnessed countless performances. Yet tonight, there is something about your demeanor that speaks volumes. Tell me, madam, how do you truly feel about Madame Devereux's rise to prominence? Bellamy stiffened, her expression tightening into a cold mask. I've never been concerned with the politics of the theater, Poirot, she replied quickly. I am a professional, and that is all that matters. Poirot's eyes narrowed. You may speak of professionalism, but there is something in your tone, in the way you avoid my gaze, that suggests a deeper emotion. A rivalry, perhaps? A desire for the attention that once belonged to you? Bellamy's eyes flashed, but she quickly regained her composure. I told you, I have no issue with Victoria, she said, her voice clipped. This is about the performance, not personal feelings. Poirot regarded her quietly for a moment. I understand, Madame Bellamy, but sometimes our personal feelings drive us more than we realize. With a nod, Poirot turned his attention away from her and toward Beaumont, the opera house manager. His hands were tightly clasped in front of him, his lips pressed into a thin line. His nerves were visible, though he was trying his best to maintain his composure. Monsieur Beaumont, Poirot said, his voice deliberate, as the manager of this fine establishment, you must understand the importance of maintaining control. But something slipped tonight, did it not? You failed to prevent this disruption, despite your authority. Beaumont shifted uncomfortably, his gaze darting to the others before settling on Poirot. I did everything I could, he said, his voice strained. There was no warning that this would happen. How could I have known? Poirot's gaze was unwavering, but there were signs, Monsieur Beaumont. Tensions among the performers, the strange behavior of your stars. You knew something was wrong. Tell me who stands to gain from the destruction of the mask tonight. Beaumont swallowed, his throat dry. He glanced at Halliday, then Bellamy, as if seeking support, but none came. I don't know, he stammered. I only want to get this under control. I can't afford to lose the opera house's reputation. Poirot leaned in slightly. But you must, Monsieur Beaumont, admit that the mask held great symbolic value. It was more than just a prop, it was a piece of the show's identity. And now it is gone. Someone wanted to send a message. The question is who? Beaumont's face drained of color as he struggled to find words. I don't know, Poirot. I can't say. Poirot straightened, his eyes sharp as he looked over the group. The answers, though hidden beneath layers of deception, were there. It would take time, but Poirot had the patience to uncover them. He had learned long ago that the most subtle details were often the most revealing. Thank you, Monsieur Beaumont, Poirot said with a nod. For now, I will leave you with your thoughts. But remember, someone here knows more than they are letting on. The room fell silent again as Poirot turned and began to walk toward the door. But just as his hand touched the doorknob, a soft but insistent knock sounded from the other side. Poirot paused, his senses alert. There was more to come, more that would soon change everything. The mystery was far from over. Chapter 7. The psychological gamma. Poirot's eyes remained fixed on the door, where a soft knock had interrupted the room's heavy silence. His mind, ever calculating, had already begun to spin theories on what awaited him beyond the door. A new development, a new lead, or perhaps, more likely, another attempt at misdirection. Whoever had entered the room was no doubt aware of the growing tension, and that made them dangerous in Poirot's estimation. With a fluid motion, Poirot turned the knob and swung open the door. To his surprise, it was Dr. Grayson, the doctor who had attended to Madame Devereux after her collapse on stage. The man's face was flushed, his breathing quickened with urgency. Poirot, Dr. Grayson said breathlessly, You need to come with me. There's something unusual. You must see it for yourself." Poirot raised an eyebrow. "Unusual, you say? What could be more unusual than a mask that shatters for no apparent reason, and a performance turned into chaos?" he asked dryly. His eyes, however, were sharp with curiosity. Dr. Grayson hesitated before speaking again, his voice lowering. "It's Victoria. She's awake, but she's different. She's been asking for you." Poirot's interest was piqued. "Very well," he said, his voice resolute. "Lead the way, mon ami." Moments later, Poirot found himself standing in the dimly lit infirmary of the Opera House. Madame Devereux lay in a simple cot, her face pale but her eyes wide and unnervingly alert. The doctor had moved aside, allowing Poirot to step closer. "Madame Devereux," Poirot began, his voice low, "I see you have returned to us. A remarkable recovery, considering the shock you endured earlier." Victoria's eyes locked onto his, and for a brief moment, Poirot felt a chill run through him. There was something unsettling about her gaze. It was as if she were seeing more than what was in front of her, something hidden behind the veil of the present. "I know why you're here, Poirot," she said, her voice soft but firm. Her tone was strange, detached from the usual fragility of a person recovering from trauma. It was as if her words were weighed down by a deeper understanding. Poirot paused, momentarily caught off guard. "You do." Victoria's lips twitched into the faintest of smiles, but it did not reach her eyes. "You're here because of the mask. You think it was a symbol, don't you? A message. You want to know who destroyed it, who shattered my carefully constructed world." Poirot studied her, his brow furrowing. He had expected confusion, perhaps even fear, but not this. Her composure was unsettling. "Indeed, madam, the mask was no simple object. But tell me, how did you know? How do you know what I think?" She paused, as if weighing his words carefully, before answering. "Because I saw it. I saw the mask being broken. I saw the person who did it." Poirot's pulse quickened, but he masked his surprise. "You saw it?" he asked, his voice even. "But you were unconscious." How Victoria's eyes darkened. "You think I don't know what happens when a person is on the brink of death? You think I don't know what it's like to see the world from the other side? I saw Poirot. I saw the one who shattered my mask. And they're still here. They're in this room, right now." Poirot felt his stomach twist. The implications of her words were too heavy to ignore. He had assumed that the mask's destruction was an act of misdirection, a crime meant to throw them off course. But now he was faced with the unsettling possibility that it had been a carefully planned message, a symbol with far deeper meaning. "Who?" Poirot asked, his voice now tight with urgency. "Who did this, Madame Devereux?" Victoria's gaze shifted toward the door, her eyes narrowing as though seeing someone standing just out of view. Poirot turned, instinctively following her line of sight, but there was no one there. The room, though small, was empty. "The one who thinks they've won," she whispered. "The one who wants everything. The one who thinks they can control everything." Poirot's mind raced. The person she described was not just a mere actor in this tragedy, they were the mastermind, the one pulling the strings behind the scenes. "You are certain of this?" Poirot asked, his voice softer now, a touch of empathy slipping through his usually composed exterior. "You are certain this person was the one who destroyed your mask?" Victoria nodded slowly, but her expression remained distant. "I saw them, but they don't want me to remember. They've been trying to cloud my mind, to make me forget. That's why I woke up like this." She paused, her lips trembling. "But I won't forget." Poirot stepped closer, his eyes searching her face. He could see that something had shifted within her, something had broken. Something more than just the mask. "You are a strong woman, madam. You must remain strong. Do not let this person control you. You must tell me everything you saw, everything you remember." Victoria's gaze darkened further. "I can't," she whispered, her voice quivering. "They'll kill me if I do." Poirot placed a reassuring hand on her arm. "No, madam, I will protect you. No harm will come to you if you speak the truth." For a moment, the room was still. Victoria closed her eyes, her face drawn in concentration. Then, with a deep breath, she spoke again. "The one who did it," she said softly. Her voice barely audible, "is someone you wouldn't expect." Poirot's heart skipped a beat. Who? Victoria's eyes flicked open, meeting his gaze with an intensity that sent a shiver down his spine. "The one closest to you," she said, her voice tinged with finality. Poirot stood motionless for a moment, the weight of her words sinking in. The game had changed, and the stakes were higher than ever. The truth, as always, was hidden beneath layers of deception, but now it was closer than ever to being revealed. Chapter 8. A secondary mystery. Poirot stood still for a long moment, his thoughts spinning with the implications of Victoria Devereux's words. The one closest to him. The very idea struck him like a cold gust of wind, and yet it was not unexpected. In his years of unraveling the most intricate webs of deception, Poirot had learned one crucial truth: the greatest secrets are often hidden in plain sight. Victoria's eyes held his, unwavering. She had said enough, just enough to make him think, but not enough to give him all the answers. The weight of her statement lingered in the air, pressing down on him. "The one closest to him, Monsieur Poirot," Victoria whispered, her voice breaking the silence. "You must trust me. I know who it is, but they will stop at nothing to silence me." Her voice faltered for a moment, a slight tremble creeping in. "They think I can't remember, but I do. I remember everything." Poirot nodded slowly, his gaze softening as he looked at the woman who had been the center of the evening's chaos. She was fragile, but there was strength in her resolve. He knew that if anyone could help him crack this case, it would be her. But for now, he needed more than cryptic warnings. He needed clarity. "You must rest now, Madame Devereux," Poirot said gently, placing a hand on her shoulder. "I will protect you, but first, you must be strong. We must gather our facts before we act." Her eyes fluttered, and she nodded slowly, the tension in her face easing as she closed her eyes. Poirot stood for a moment longer, watching over her, but his mind was already elsewhere. He needed to confront the others now. He needed to see the bigger picture. Leaving the infirmary, Poirot found himself walking down the grand corridors of the Opera House, his mind still reeling from the conversation. He had been on the right track, that much was clear, but there were more pieces to the puzzle that had yet to fall into place. Victoria's revelation that the person behind the mask's destruction was someone close to him only served to deepen the mystery. But who? He had his suspicions, of course, but suspicions were not enough. It was time to gather more information, to challenge his own assumptions, and most importantly, to see how the others would react to a new wave of questioning. Poirot stepped into the drawing room where the suspects had been gathered earlier. The tension in the room had not lifted. Each person stood rigid, their eyes darting toward him as he entered. The silence was palpable. "Monsieur Beaumont," Poirot began, addressing the opera house manager, who had been standing by the window. "We must speak again. There's much I need to understand, and time is of the essence." Beaumont, though visibly drained from the evening's events, straightened at the sound of Poirot's voice. "What now, Monsieur Poirot?" he asked, his tone weary but still laced with an undercurrent of defensiveness. "I've told you everything I know." Poirot raised a hand to stop him. "It is not enough. There are still questions unanswered. You must tell me more about your relationships with the staff, the performers. You cannot think that this is all coincidence, Monsieur Beaumont. The mask was destroyed for a reason, and the reason lies within this very house." Beaumont hesitated, his gaze flicking to the other suspects in the room. "I don't know what you expect from me. I've given you all the information I have." Poirot stepped closer, his voice lowering. Tell me, Monsieur Beaumont, what happened between you and Madame Bellamy? There's a tension between you two, something deeper than mere professional differences. What is it? The manager stiffened, his face flushing. Madame Bellamy? She's just an employee, a performer. There's nothing between us, Monsieur Poirot. Poirot's gaze didn't waver. I think you misunderstand me, Monsieur Beaumont. I am not speaking of a personal relationship, but a professional one. I see the cracks in your story, the lies beneath the surface. Beaumont's hand clenched around the edge of a chair as he seemed to struggle for words. But before he could respond, a sudden crash echoed through the house. The sound of glass breaking, followed by a shout, rang out from the hallway. Poirot's mind instantly shifted from the interview to the new development. Without a word, he turned toward the door, the others following closely behind. They reached the source of the disturbance quickly, a broken window. The glass shards scattered on the floor, with a figure standing near it, frozen in place. It was the stagehand, the same young man who had been present earlier when Poirot had first asked about the mask. His eyes were wide with shock, and his hands were trembling. What happened? Poirot asked, his voice calm but insistent. I didn't mean to, the stagehand stammered, his voice cracking. I was looking for something, and then I saw it. I think someone was in the room, and I was trying to stop them. But I broke the window, and Poirot's sharp eyes flicked over the boy's figure. Noticing the wildness in his eyes, the panic that had overtaken him. The scene was chaotic, but Poirot's mind had already begun to piece together what had happened. The boy had seen something, and it was something he wasn't meant to see. A new layer to the mystery had just emerged, and Poirot's instincts told him that the key to this new lead was in that broken window. Someone was here, Poirot said, more to himself than anyone else. Someone who doesn't want the truth to be revealed. The stagehand nodded vigorously, his hands still trembling. Yes, I saw someone. I didn't mean to break the glass, but I had to stop them. Poirot turned back toward the others, his eyes sharp. I believe we have just uncovered the beginning of something far more dangerous. The mystery was no longer just about a broken mask. It was about a conspiracy, one that had only just begun to unfold. And Poirot knew that this was only the beginning of a far darker story. Chapter 9, Hidden Connections to Broken Window, remained a silent testament to the chaos that had unfolded in the opera house. Poirot stood at the threshold of the hallway, his gaze fixed on the shattered glass that littered the floor. His mind was already piecing together the events, the boy's frantic words, the sudden, unexplained intrusion. Someone had been here, someone who was desperate to keep the truth hidden. Poirot turned back to the group, his sharp eyes assessing each person in the room. The stagehand was still trembling, his face pale with a mixture of fear and guilt. His nervousness had only deepened the mystery. Why had he been so desperate to stop someone? Who had been here? Explain yourself, Poirot said, his voice firm but not unkind. You said you saw someone. Who was it? The stagehand opened his mouth to speak, but his words caught in his throat. He looked at the others, unsure whether to reveal what he had seen. Poirot's piercing gaze softened, but there was an edge to it, a quiet insistence that made the boy shift uncomfortably. I don't know, the boy stammered. I was just coming down the hallway. I saw a shadow, a person, just standing there in the dark. I thought maybe they were trying to steal something, so I rushed forward to stop them. I wasn't thinking, and I broke the window. Who was this person? Poirot pressed. You must know something more. The stagehand's eyes darted around the room. I didn't see their face, but it was someone tall, someone with a cloak. I couldn't see clearly in the dark. Poirot's mind raced, but he kept his thoughts to himself. A figure in the dark, cloaked and unrecognizable. It could have been anyone, yet the boy's fear spoke volumes. Someone had been trying to cover their tracks. But why? What was it they didn't want him to find? Poirot took a deep breath, suppressing his thoughts for the moment. Very well, we shall get to the bottom of this. But I must ask you all to stay calm and let us proceed step by step. He turned to the others, his gaze sweeping over the group. The connections between them were starting to take shape, but there were still too many unknowns. This was no simple case of a broken mask, of jealousy or rivalry. There were layers to this, layers that had to be peeled back slowly, carefully. Monsieur Beaumont. Poirot began, his voice cool. We have not yet spoken about the financial side of things. You control the purse strings of this establishment. Tell me, what is the current financial situation here? Could someone be motivated by money, by a threat to their livelihood? Beaumont stiffened. What are you implying, Poirot? Do you believe someone here is financially motivated? I assure you, this opera house is not struggling. We've had our successes, and even in this unfortunate event, our patrons are loyal. Poirot's expression remained unchanged. I see, but you do not deny, Monsieur Beaumont, that money can sometimes be a powerful motivator. You would not be the first to have a secret, something that could be used to manipulate your actions. Beaumont clenched his fists, his gaze hardening. I have nothing to hide. This is ridiculous. Poirot nodded slowly. Perhaps, but I am not so quick to dismiss such things, Monsieur Beaumont. You have an interest in protecting this theater, yes? But would you go to great lengths to protect it, even at the cost of someone else's reputation? Beaumont flinched at the implication, but he didn't answer. His silence was telling, though Poirot knew better than to rush him. The financial aspect of the case was critical. Someone stood to gain from all this chaos, whether they had stolen something or sought to ruin a rival. But who? Poirot's thoughts were interrupted by the sudden sound of footsteps approaching. He turned toward the doorway, expecting the arrival of more information. The door creaked open, and a familiar face entered the room. Geoffrey Halliday, the lead actor, his brow furrowed, his expression one of mounting frustration. Monsieur Poirot, we need to talk, Halliday said, his voice tense. I've had enough of this. You're accusing everyone, but what about the truth? What about the real culprit? Poirot held his ground, unfazed by the actor's sudden outburst. Ah, Monsieur Halliday, it seems you are not entirely satisfied with our progress. Tell me, then, what do you believe to be the truth? I would be very interested in hearing your thoughts. Halliday took a step forward, his hands clenched into fists. The truth is simple. Someone here is trying to frame someone else, and I think I know who it is. It's Madame Bellamy. She's the one with the motive, the one who stands to lose everything now that Victoria is in the spotlight. Poirot's eyes narrowed slightly, but his expression remained impassive. Madame Bellamy, he repeated, considering the accusation. Interesting, but what evidence do you have to support such a claim? Halliday's gaze flicked to Bellamy, who stood near the back of the room, her face unreadable. I've seen the way she acts, the way she's always looking over her shoulder, waiting for her moment. She's been jealous of Victoria for years. She's bitter, and she's desperate. Desperate people do desperate things. Poirot remained silent for a long moment, his eyes fixed on Halliday. Desperation is indeed a powerful motivator, Monsieur Halliday, but we must be careful not to jump to conclusions. We are here to find the truth, not to place blame without proof. Halliday's eyes flashed, but he didn't speak further. Poirot's mind was already turning over the new accusation. Could it be? Had Bellamy's jealousy finally reached the point of violence? The question hovered in the air, but Poirot refused to let himself be swayed by mere suspicion. Very well, Poirot said, his voice calm. I shall consider this. But remember, the truth is never as simple as it seems. We must dig deeper, look beyond the obvious. There's more to this story, and we have only scratched the surface. The room fell silent once more, the weight of the investigation pressing down on them all. The connections were there, but they remained hidden beneath layers of deception. And Poirot, with his sharp mind and unwavering patience, was determined to uncover every last detail. The mystery was far from over. Chapter 10. Poirot's secret clue. Tension in the room was palpable as the suspects shifted uncomfortably in their chairs. The previous accusations had done little to alleviate the sense of unease. If anything, they had only deepened the mystery. Each new revelation seemed to breed more uncertainty, and the threads of deception were beginning to entangle themselves further. Poirot's mind, however, remained as sharp as ever, cutting through the fog of lies with precision. He had listened carefully to each of them, each of their stories, each of their justifications. He had watched the subtle shifts in their expressions, the way their voices trembled under the pressure. All of them had their secrets, their motives. But one thing had remained clear throughout the entire investigation. The mask had been a symbol. More than that, it was a message. Someone had wanted to destroy it, and that person was still among them. Poirot sat back in his chair, his fingers steepled in front of him as he considered the various pieces of the puzzle. His thoughts were racing, the fragments of the evening's events swirling together in his mind. A piece of information, so small yet so critical, had appeared during the interviews, something he hadn't fully processed until now. It was subtle, something easily overlooked, but it was the key to unlocking the mystery. Turning to the group, Poirot spoke in a measured tone. "We are close, my friends. The truth is within our reach. There is one clue, one small inconsistency that we have missed, but it is crucial. And now I believe I have it." The room fell into a stunned silence as Poirot's eyes scanned each of them, taking in their reactions. The weight of his words hung in the air like a heavy cloud. He had said nothing of the clue so far, but he was certain it would lead him to the heart of the mystery. It was time to make his move. "Monsieur Beaumont," Poirot began, his voice as calm as ever. "You spoke earlier about the financial stability of the Opera House. You said there were no struggles, no hidden motives. But I believe there is more to this than just the performance or the mask. There's something deeper, something you are not telling me." Beaumont shifted in his seat, clearly uncomfortable. "I've told you everything, Poirot. I've been transparent about the situation." Poirot leaned forward, his eyes never leaving the manager's face. "Are you certain, Monsieur Beaumont? You see, I do not believe you. I believe you know more than you are letting on. The mask, the destruction of it, was not just a random act. It was a warning, and the person who issued that warning was someone who had a great deal to lose." Beaumont swallowed hard, his eyes darting to the others. "I don't know what you're talking about." Poirot's gaze hardened. "No, Monsieur Beaumont, you do know. The Opera House's reputation is of great importance to you, but there is more to it than that. There's something personal at stake, something that you fear being exposed. I suspect you are being blackmailed." Beaumont's face went white, his lips trembling as he glanced at the others. "Blackmailed? That's absurd." Poirot remained calm. "Is it? You have a lot to lose, Monsieur Beaumont. If the Opera House were to collapse, you would be left with nothing. Your financial stability would crumble. Your reputation would be ruined. Perhaps there are things in your past, things you would rather not have brought to light." The room was silent as Beaumont's expression shifted. His face twisted into something between guilt and fear. He opened his mouth to speak but closed it again, as if he couldn't find the right words. It was clear that Poirot had struck a nerve. The detective turned his attention to the others. "You see, the answer was always here, hidden in plain sight. The destruction of the mask was not just about rivalry or jealousy. It was about power, control, and something much darker than we had considered." He paused, allowing the tension to build before continuing. "Monsieur Beaumont has been hiding something. He is at the center of this mystery, but he is not the only one with secrets. There are others here, others who stand to gain from the chaos that is unfolding. And soon, they will be exposed. Poirot's eyes flicked to Geoffrey Halliday, who was sitting stiffly in his chair. You, Monsieur Halliday, have been quick to point the finger at others, but you two are hiding something. I believe you know far more about this situation than you've let on. Halliday shifted uncomfortably, his eyes avoiding Poirot's. I told you, I don't know anything. I've been honest. Poirot's gaze narrowed. You were seen entering Madame Devereux's dressing room just before the performance. Why? Halliday's face flushed. I know, Poirot interjected. Do not try to lie to me, Monsieur Halliday. The truth is already clear. You were not there to offer support. You were there to send a message. A message that would make sure everyone knew your place in this theater. Halliday's lips trembled, but no words came out. Poirot's mind raced as he processed the significance of these revelations. Beaumont's involvement was more than just a coincidence, but Halliday's role was becoming clearer with every passing moment. Yet, there was still one more piece of the puzzle that needed to fall into place. Poirot's eyes flicked toward Madame Bellamy, who had been watching the exchange with a curious intensity. And you, Madame Bellamy, Poirot said, his voice softening. What is your role in all of this? You have been quiet, while the others have spoken. I suspect you know more than you're letting on. Bellamy's expression shifted, a faint flicker of surprise crossing her face. She stood, her hands trembling as she straightened her gown. I know nothing, she said, her voice steady but lacking conviction. Poirot stepped closer, his voice low and persuasive. The truth, Madame Bellamy, is closer than you think. You have a part to play in this mystery, whether you choose to admit it or not. And soon, you two will be forced to reveal it. The room was heavy with silence. The secrets that had been buried beneath the surface for so long were beginning to surface, one by one. But the most important clue, the one that Poirot had been searching for, was still elusive, just beyond his reach. And as he stood before the suspects, Poirot knew that the next step in this complex dance would reveal the true culprit. But for now, the puzzle was not complete. The final piece was still waiting to be found. Chapter 11. Tension's ricid atmosphere in the room was suffocating, the weight of each person's silence pressing down on the group. Poirot had spoken the truth. The game had changed. This was no longer a simple matter of a broken mask. It was a much darker, more intricate web. But still, the pieces eluded him, the final revelation slipping further from his grasp. Poirot's eyes flicked from one suspect to the next. Each of them held their own secrets they were too careful to expose. But Poirot had learned long ago that even the most well-constructed lies often betray their maker. The tension in the room was palpable, every movement charged with suspicion. Monsieur Halliday, Poirot said, his voice steady but probing. I do not believe your frustrations earlier were just the result of nerves. There's more to your agitation than you are letting on. Halliday's face flushed, his body stiffening as if Poirot's words were a direct strike. I've told you before, Poirot, he said, his voice strained. I was upset, but it was just the performance. The pressure, the spotlight. Any actor would have reacted the same way. Poirot's eyes never left him. Pressure, yes, he said. But what about the mask? You seemed deeply unsettled when it shattered. What do you know that you have not yet told us, Monsieur Halliday? Halliday shifted uncomfortably, avoiding Poirot's gaze. I don't know what you're implying, he muttered, his words faltering. He was hiding something. Poirot could see it in the way his shoulders tensed. But for now, Poirot chose not to press further. He turned his attention to the next person in the room, Edward Beaumont, the opera house manager. Beaumont had been quiet, almost too quiet, his earlier defensiveness replaced by a sullen, withdrawn demeanor. His nervousness was evident, but Poirot knew the key to unlocking the truth lay in understanding the motive behind his discomfort. Monsieur Beaumont, Poirot said, his voice low but insistent, you've said little tonight, and yet I suspect you know more than you let on. The mask, the destruction of it was not just an act of randomness. There is something far more personal behind this. Beaumont shifted uneasily. His hands clenched in front of him. I don't know what you're talking about, he said, his voice strained. I've told you everything. The mask, it was just an accident. A terrible accident. Poirot raised an eyebrow. An accident? He repeated, his gaze unwavering. A piece of porcelain falling and shattering? No, Monsieur Beaumont. I believe you know this was no accident. You have something to hide, and it is time to reveal it. The manager's face paled, and for a fleeting moment, Poirot saw a crack in his composure, a hint of fear that had not been there before. But before the interrogation could continue, the door to the room creaked open, and Geoffrey Halliday's sharp voice cut through the silence. Monsieur Poirot, Halliday snapped. This has gone far enough. You've accused everyone here. But what about you? What are you hiding? You've been watching us, testing us, but you have not once shared your thoughts. Poirot turned slowly, his expression calm, but his eyes hardening. You are right, Monsieur Halliday. I have been testing you all, but I do not hide my intentions. I seek only the truth. Halliday stepped forward, his posture stiff. Then tell me, Poirot, what do you really know? Who do you think is behind this? Poirot regarded him carefully, his eyes narrowing. The person who broke the mask is someone far closer to you than you realize, Monsieur Halliday. But the question is why? Why go to such lengths to destroy something so symbolic? Halliday's face hardened, his jaw clenching. I have nothing to do with it, he said, though his voice lacked conviction. Poirot paused, letting the silence settle. You see, Monsieur Halliday, the truth always comes out in the end. And when it does, we will find that the person who destroyed the mask is not who you think it is. Just as the tension in the room seemed unbearable, another knock echoed through the hallway. Poirot's eyes flicked toward the door, sensing something was about to change. Without waiting for the officer to announce himself, Poirot opened the door to reveal the young stagehand. His face drawn with anxiety. Poirot, the stagehand said, his voice trembling, there's been another incident. A letter. It was left in Madame Devereux's dressing room. Poirot's heart skipped a beat. A letter, he repeated, his mind racing. This was no ordinary case. No mere accident, it was a carefully orchestrated campaign of fear and control. The pieces were beginning to fit together, but there was still one thing missing, the final piece. The stagehand handed Poirot the crumpled letter, which the detective examined with careful hands. It was brief, its message cryptic, but one thing stood out, a symbol, a mark Poirot recognized from the first day of the investigation. Poirot's eyes flicked to the group in the room. The game has changed, he said, his voice low and grave. We are no longer simply dealing with the destruction of a mask. We are dealing with something much more dangerous. Someone is pulling the strings, and they are very close. The room fell silent. The mystery was no longer a series of isolated events. It was a web, a trap, and Poirot knew it was only a matter of time before the culprit made their final move. Chapter 12. The confrontation. Poirot stood still, observing the suspects in the dimly lit room. The tension had escalated. He had pushed them, questioned their motives, and yet, something in the air told him the true mystery remained hidden beneath layers of misdirection. He had to confront them now, without delay. The time for subtlety had passed. Monsieur Beaumont, Poirot began, his voice steady, but sharp. You have been unusually quiet tonight, but I sense you are not as innocent as you would have me believe. You have a great deal to protect, do you not? Your opera house, your reputation, and perhaps something far more personal. Beaumont stiffened, his eyes flashing with nervousness. I've told you everything I know, he said quickly, his voice faltering slightly. Poirot did not relent. Ah, but what you know is not enough. What you hide is what interests me, Monsieur Beaumont. What is it you fear to have exposed? There's something you are desperately trying to keep buried, something you think I cannot see. But I assure you, I have already seen it." Beaumont's face paled further. He opened his mouth to protest but seemed unable to find the words. Poirot's eyes never left him. This is no longer about a broken mask. This is about power, control, and manipulation. You are no stranger to these things, are you, Monsieur Beaumont? Beaumont clenched his fists. "I don't know what you mean," he muttered, but Poirot could tell he was on the verge of breaking. Poirot turned toward Madame Bellamy, who had been quiet up until this point, her face an unreadable mask. "Madame Bellamy," he said, his voice calm but probing, "you have not yet spoken of your involvement in this. Your rivalry with Madame Devereux is well known. But I wonder if your actions tonight go beyond mere professional jealousy." Bellamy's eyes flashed with irritation, but she composed herself quickly. "I've already told you, Poirot, I have no part in this. This is about the performance. It's about what's best for the opera house." Poirot tilted his head, watching her carefully. "Perhaps, but something tells me there is more to it than that, Madame Bellamy. You were not content with simply being a performer. You wanted to be at the center, to control the narrative of this opera house." Bellamy's lips trembled, but she remained silent. Poirot's gaze shifted toward Halliday, who had been watching the interaction with increasing discomfort. "Monsieur Halliday," Poirot addressed him now, "you have been quick to point the finger at others, but you must realize, you too, have your own motives. You stood to gain the most from Madame Devereux's downfall, did you not?" Halliday's face tightened, his fists clenching in frustration. "I've already told you this isn't about me. It's not about me wanting anything. It's about the truth. Someone is manipulating all of us." Poirot's eyes narrowed. "Manipulation. Yes, you are right, Monsieur Halliday. But I do not believe you are innocent in this. I think you are hiding something you are unwilling to reveal. The mask was destroyed, but it wasn't just about jealousy, was it? It was about power. You too were trying to control something." Halliday took a step back, his eyes shifting to the others in the room, clearly uneasy. "You're wrong, Poirot. You're just looking for someone to blame." Poirot didn't respond right away, letting the silence hang heavy. He turned toward the young stagehand, who had been present during much of the investigation. The boy was pale, his hands still trembling. "And you," Poirot said, his voice softer but no less intense. "What do you know? What did you see when you broke the window? You were trying to stop someone, but what was it you were trying to stop?" The stagehand hesitated, his voice shaky. I didn't mean to. I thought someone was trying to." He stopped himself, his words faltering as he looked to the others for reassurance. Poirot stepped closer, his gaze never leaving the boy. "What did you think, mon ami?" Poirot pressed. "You saw someone, didn't you? Someone who was trying to stop something important. Tell me, what did you see?" The boy's eyes darted around the room before he finally spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. "I saw someone in the hallway, just standing there. I thought they were up to something, trying to mess with the performance. Maybe. I wasn't sure, but when I went to stop them, I broke the window. It wasn't supposed to happen. I wasn't trying to." Poirot's mind raced. The pieces were beginning to click into place. The boy hadn't just broken the window. He had interrupted something. Someone had been trying to sabotage the performance. But who and why? Poirot turned back to the group, his expression hardening. "The truth is close now. Someone in this room is trying to manipulate us all, and it is time we face it." He paused, letting his words sink in. The air was thick with anticipation, each person waiting for the next move. Poirot stepped forward, his voice low but clear. "The one who destroyed the mask," he said, "is someone who has been playing all of us like pawns. But we will find them, soon." The room held its breath. and Poirot knew that the final confrontation was near. Chapter 13. The final piece falls into place. The room was silent, heavy with the weight of Poirot's words. Beaumont's confession had cracked open the mystery, but the final truth remained elusive. The pieces were nearly in place, but Poirot knew there was still one connection missing. He could feel it. Poirot's gaze swept over the suspects, each of them now showing signs of strain. The revelation that someone had been manipulating them all had set their nerves on edge. It was clear they knew the moment of reckoning had arrived. There would be no more hiding. Monsieur Beaumont, Poirot began, his voice steady. You have confessed much, but not everything. You were blackmailed. You feared for your position and the opera house. But there is something more. What did they threaten you with, truly? Beaumont's eyes flicked nervously to the others. I can't, he whispered, voice trembling. I've told you enough. Please, don't make me say it. Poirot's eyes never left him. You cannot escape, Monsieur Beaumont. You must tell me who is behind this. Who is the true mastermind? Who is pulling the strings? Beaumont swallowed hard, his hands shaking. I didn't want to be part of this, he stammered. They have something on me, something I can't. Poirot stepped closer, his voice lowering. Who, Monsieur Beaumont? Who are you protecting? For a moment, Beaumont seemed to crack under the pressure, his expression pained. He opened his mouth, but no words came out. Poirot remained patient, waiting. Finally, Beaumont muttered a name, his voice barely above a whisper. It was Halliday. He gasped. The room froze. Geoffrey Halliday, who had been quiet up until this point, shot to his feet. His face drained of color. What? That's not true. I didn't do anything. What are you talking about? Poirot remained calm, studying Halliday's reaction. I see, Monsieur Halliday. You are quick to deny, but your reaction betrays you. You are involved, aren't you? You have played a part in all this. Halliday's expression twisted, his fists clenched at his sides. I didn't have a choice, he said, voice shaking. I was forced into it, just like everyone else. I didn't want any of this. Poirot stepped closer, his eyes sharp. You had a choice, Monsieur Halliday. We all do. But you made your choice, didn't you? You were part of a plan, one that goes far beyond just destroying a mask. Halliday's mouth opened, but no words came out. His chest rose and fell in rapid breaths, the weight of Poirot's words pressing down on him. He was caught in a lie he couldn't escape. Poirot turned away from him and directed his attention to Madame Bellamy. And you, Madame Bellamy, you've been quiet for too long. You knew about this, didn't you? You knew more than you let on. Bellamy's eyes narrowed, but she said nothing. Poirot took another step toward her. You have been playing the game, haven't you? You've been manipulating those around you to secure your position. But there is more to this than just rivalry. You've been involved in something much darker, haven't you? Bellamy's lips tightened, but she didn't speak. Poirot could see the guilt in her posture, the subtle shift in her expression. She was hiding something, and Poirot knew that the moment had come for her to face the truth. Madame Bellamy, Poirot said, his voice softer but firm. You thought you could control the situation, that you could outplay the others. But it's over now. Your involvement in this conspiracy is clear. She shook her head slightly, her face hardening. But Poirot didn't relent. You are part of this, Madame Bellamy, just as much as the rest of them. You have been playing a dangerous game, and now the consequences are here. Bellamy's silence spoke volumes. Poirot's gaze moved to the others, and he could see the realization dawning on each of them. They had all been part of this, whether willingly or not. But now, the truth was out. The game had come to an end. Poirot turned back to Beaumont. You were being manipulated, Monsieur Beaumont. But you are not the only one. You were all used to achieving a goal, one that was far bigger than a simple rivalry. Someone else was pulling the strings. He looked around the room, his eyes lingering on each suspect. The mask, the blackmail, the manipulation, they were all part of a plan. But the mastermind behind it all is still in this room. The silence deepened, and Poirot's eyes glinted with determination. The final piece was now in place. The person who had orchestrated this entire plot was no longer hidden. The mastermind was someone they all knew, but no one had dared to suspect. With a final, deliberate glance around the room, Poirot spoke softly. "The truth will come out, and when it does, the real culprit will be exposed." The room remained still, and the truth hung in the air like a storm about to break. The game was finally over. Chapter 14. The revealed silence that followed Poirot's words was suffocating. The suspects in the room had grown tense, their faces pale, eyes wide with unease. Every one of them seemed to be holding their breath, waiting for the final revelation. The room felt smaller now, the walls pressing in as Poirot's calm, deliberate tone reverberated in their minds. "The truth, as I said, is now within our grasp," Poirot continued, his eyes flicking from one suspect to another. "The person behind the destruction of the mask, the blackmail, the manipulation. It is time for them to step forward." There was a flicker of movement in the room. Each person seemed to shift in their seat, discomfort visibly spreading across their faces. Madame Bellamy's jaw clenched, her eyes darting around as if trying to gauge the others' reactions. Halliday, still standing, looked ready to explode with frustration, his fists clenched tight at his sides. Beaumont was the most nervous, his body practically trembling in the corner, his every gesture betraying the panic coursing through him. Poirot turned his gaze to each one of them with methodical precision. "The moment has arrived," he said, his voice sharp, "for you to face the consequences of your actions. But first, I must ask you a question." He stepped closer to the group, allowing the silence to stretch out for a moment, ensuring that everyone was paying attention. "What is it that we seek, all of us, in this game of deception?" Poirot's question lingered, and the tension thickened in the room. Is it power, control, or is it, perhaps, the simplest thing of all, survival? The eyes of the suspects flicked to one another, their uncertainty palpable. No one spoke. Poirot's gaze turned cold as he locked eyes with Madame Bellamy. "Madame Bellamy, you have spent years in this theater, your heart and soul bound to it. But now you are not the only one with something to lose. This isn't just about your place on stage. This is about something deeper, something far darker." Bellamy's face hardened, but she said nothing. Poirot then turned to Halliday, who was practically seething now, his breathing shallow. "And you, Monsieur Halliday, a man who's lost so much already, so desperate to hold on to what remains. But your actions tonight, your role in all of this, betray your true intentions. You were never just a victim. You were a willing player in this game." Halliday opened his mouth to argue, but Poirot held up a hand, silencing him. "Don't speak yet. There's more to your involvement than meets the eye, and soon. You will have to face the reality of your choices." Poirot's sharp gaze shifted to Beaumont, whose anxiety was now so thick it was almost palpable. "And you, Monsieur Beaumont, have been the puppet, the one who feared exposure, who feared losing everything. But you did not act alone, did you? You were guided, manipulated by someone who has been hiding behind you this entire time." Beaumont looked desperate now, his hands clenched at his sides. No, it wasn't like that, Poirot. I didn't want any of this. I didn't." Poirot's eyes narrowed. "You didn't want it, but you were willing to let someone else carry out the plan. Someone who promised you safety in exchange for your silence." He paused, letting the weight of his words sink in. "Who, Monsieur Beaumont? Who are you protecting?" Beaumont's face drained of color, and he swallowed hard. "I can't," he stammered. But Poirot's steady gaze pushed him onward. The truth was bubbling to the surface, and Beaumont could no longer avoid it. Poirot took a step forward. "It is clear, Monsieur Beaumont. You are not the mastermind, but you were complicit. You've been manipulated, just like the others. The one who has been orchestrating everything is someone close, someone in this very room. The room seemed to tighten further as Poirot's words hung in the air. Every suspect was now tense, their eyes darting around, but no one spoke. Poirot allowed a brief, silent pause to draw out the suspense. Then his voice sliced through the quiet like a knife. "It is you, Madame Bellamy," Poirot declared, his voice steady and unwavering. "You have been the one behind it all." Bellamy's face twisted in disbelief, her mouth opening and closing as if trying to find words that would undo the accusation. What do you mean?" "That's impossible." Poirot stepped closer, his eyes intense. "You did it, madam. You controlled the theater. You saw it slipping away, and you couldn't bear to let it go. Your jealousy of Madame Devereux's rise, your desperation to reclaim your place, it pushed you to do this. You used everyone here, even Beaumont. You manipulated Halliday into acting on your behalf, and now it is time to admit it." Bellamy's mask of composure cracked, her lips trembling as she glared at Poirot. "You don't understand. You think you know everything, but you don't. I had to do it. I had no choice. They were taking everything from me. The mask, the theater, my career." Poirot's gaze softened slightly, but his words were still sharp. "You chose this, Madame Bellamy. You chose to destroy everything for the sake of pride. And now, the truth is revealed." The room was silent, the weight of Poirot's revelation settling heavily on the group. Bellamy's face twisted with anger and frustration, but there was no denying it. Poirot had cracked the case wide open. She had been the one pulling the strings all along. With a deep breath, Poirot straightened, his gaze moving from one suspect to the next. "The truth is now laid bare. The game is over, and justice will be served." The room remained still, the finality of Poirot's words hanging in the air. The culprit was exposed, and the mystery had come to a close. Chapter 15, Outcome, and Justice's room remained still, the shock of Poirot's revelation reverberating through each suspect like an electric charge. Madame Bellamy, her face a mixture of disbelief and fury, stood motionless, her hand trembling as it gripped the back of her chair. The others remained silent, their gazes shifting uneasily between Poirot and the woman who had just been exposed. As the mastermind behind the chaos, Poirot observed the group with an unwavering calmness, his eyes never leaving Bellamy. "The truth has come to light, Madame Bellamy," he said softly, his voice unyielding. "You may not want to accept it, but the facts are undeniable. You were the one who orchestrated this entire scheme." Bellamy's lips quivered, her defiant posture crumbling as the weight of the truth pressed upon her. "No," she whispered, more to herself than to anyone else. "You don't understand. I had to do it. I had no choice." She turned her eyes toward the others, a desperate plea in them. "You don't know what it's like to be replaced, to lose everything. I couldn't just stand by and watch her Victoria take everything from me. My place, my legacy, my name." Poirot's gaze softened, but his voice remained firm. "Madame Bellamy, your legacy was not destroyed by anyone but yourself. You made choices, and those choices led to the ruin you now face." Her eyes welled with tears, but she quickly wiped them away, her pride still fighting against the overwhelming weight of her confession. "You think I didn't care about this place?" she said, her voice rising. "You think I wanted to destroy everything? I loved this theater. I built it. I was its heart. And now I've been forgotten, replaced by someone younger, someone prettier." Her voice cracked. "It wasn't just about the mask. It was about everything." Poirot listened, his expression unchanging. "It is always about more than what we first see, madam. But you must understand that your actions, your manipulation, have not only destroyed your own position, but have caused great harm to others. The mask was a symbol, yes, but it was more than that. It was a message, one that set into motion the chain of events we are now dealing with. The room grew quieter as Madame Bellamy's anger began to simmer down, the harshness in her voice replaced by a resigned, hollow tone. She slowly sank into her chair, her eyes vacant as she stared at the floor. For a moment, she seemed to lose herself in the weight of her own actions. There was no escape from the truth now. Poirot took a slow step forward. You used the others, manipulated their weaknesses. Beaumont, Halliday, even the others who were swept into your game. You were willing to destroy them all to reclaim what you believed was yours. Beaumont shifted, his face full of conflicted emotions. I didn't want to be part of it, he mumbled, looking at Bellamy with a mix of guilt and anger. I was blackmailed. She told me if I didn't help, she would ruin me. She promised that if I played along, it would all work out. Everyone has a choice. Monsieur Beaumont, Poirot replied, his tone colder now. But the fear of losing everything blinds people to the truth. You chose to cooperate, and in doing so, you allowed Madame Bellamy's scheme to unfold. Beaumont looked away, unable to meet anyone's eyes. His hands were trembling at his sides. Poirot then turned his gaze to Halliday, who had remained eerily quiet, still standing near the door, his arms folded tightly across his chest. And you, Monsieur Halliday, Poirot said, his voice calm but filled with underlying disappointment. You allowed yourself to be dragged into this by your own selfish motivations. You played your part, hoping that the fallout would never reach you. Halliday flinched, but his defiance remained. I didn't know what I was getting into. I was pushed, just like everyone else. But I didn't have the courage to stand up against her. She had control, and I just wanted to survive. Poirot nodded, acknowledging the truth in Halliday's words. Survival. It is what drives most of us. But survival at the cost of others is not survival, it is merely self-destructs. You may have thought you were acting in your own interest, but in the end, you were only serving her agenda. The room remained still. Each person in the room had a part in this, whether they realized it or not. Their individual fears, ambitions, and desires had combined to create a perfect storm of deception. And now, the storm is over. Poirot's voice softened slightly. But the time for excuses is over. The damage has been done, and now we must face the consequences. Beaumont, still trembling, finally spoke up. What will happen to us, to me? Poirot looked at him for a long moment. You will face the justice that you deserve. The consequences of your actions cannot be avoided, Monsieur Beaumont. You will have to answer for what you did. He turned to Madame Bellamy, whose defiant spirit seemed to have evaporated entirely. And you, Madame Bellamy, you will not escape either. Your pride, your desire to control it has cost you everything. Bellamy looked up at Poirot, her eyes red from munched tears. I didn't want it to end this way, she whispered. Poirot nodded, his expression softening ever so slightly. No one ever does, but the truth cannot be ignored. With that, Poirot moved toward the door. I will make my report to the authorities. They will take over from here. As he turned the doorknob, he paused. The room was still and quiet, the weight of his words hanging in the air like the final toll of a bell. The truth, Poirot said, his voice firm yet carrying a quiet sadness, always has a way of revealing itself. No matter how hard we try to hide it. The door closed behind him, leaving the room to fall into silence, broken only by the distant sounds of the opera house continuing on its mask of perfection. Now irreparably cracked. Chapter 16. The closing remark. Finality of Poirot's words hung in the air like the tolling of a distant bell, its echo fading only as he stepped out of the room, leaving the group behind to face the consequences of their actions. The door closed behind him with a soft thud, and for a moment, the opera house felt eerily quiet. The grand hallways, that had once been filled with the bustling sounds of preparation for another performance, now stood still. It was as if the entire building had been paused in time, Waiting for the final curtain to fall on this tragic tale, Poirot walked down the hall, his mind already shifting gears. He had solved the case, yes, but there was more to it than that. The puzzle had been complicated, and the players involved had each played their part, whether they knew it or not. Now, the final step was to deliver his conclusions to the authorities and ensure that justice would fall. As Poirot moved through the corridors, his thoughts turned back to the key players, Madame Bellamy, Beaumont, Halliday, and the others. Each of them had been driven by something: jealousy, fear, greed, but it had all been twisted into a dangerous game. They had underestimated the power of the truth, and in the end, it was the truth that had exposed them all. He reached his room, the door clicking softly as he entered. Poirot set his hat down on the nearby table and sat in the armchair by the window. He gazed out at the night sky, his mind clear, his work done. But there was still something lingering in the back of his mind, something that had gnawed at him. Throughout the investigation, the motivations, the desires, the fear of losing everything, it was all so human, so flawed. He couldn't help but wonder what the future held for the suspects. Now that the truth had been revealed, the detective reached for the phone and dialed the authorities, his fingers moving with a practiced ease. When the line connected, he spoke briefly, his words calm but firm. "The case is closed. Everything is in place. You may proceed." As he hung up the receiver, Poirot leaned back in his chair, his eyes narrowing slightly. The pieces of the case had come together perfectly, but there was something else now: a deeper understanding of the people involved. The human mind was capable of so much, both brilliant and tragic in equal measure. The motivations behind this crime had been as old as time itself, yet each person had brought something unique to the story. The jealousy, the fear, the desire for power, these were the forces that had driven them. And in the end, those very forces had led to their downfall. Poirot's thoughts were interrupted by a knock on the door. He straightened, his brow furrowing slightly as he rose to answer it. When he opened the door, it was not one of the authorities standing before him, but the young stagehand. His face was pale, his eyes wide with uncertainty. "Poirot," the boy said, his voice shaking slightly. "I didn't know where else to go. I think you should see this." The boy handed him a piece of paper, another letter, its handwriting unfamiliar. Poirot unfolded it with a steady hand, his eyes scanning the contents. It was short, cryptic, and disturbing. The message was simple: "You think it's over, but the game is just beginning." Poirot paused, his mind working quickly. The letter was a warning, one last piece of the puzzle, an unexpected twist in the case. Had Madame Bellamy truly been the mastermind, or was there someone else still pulling the strings from the shadows? "You've been a valuable ally," Poirot said quietly, looking at the young stagehand. "But now, I believe we have yet another mystery to unravel. Thank you for bringing this to me." The boy nodded, his expression a mixture of relief and confusion. "I didn't know what to do," he admitted. I thought you should know. I overheard somebody talking about the next step, but I didn't understand it." Poirot nodded slowly, his gaze turning back to the letter in his hand. "The game is indeed far from over," he murmured to himself as the boy left. Poirot stood by the window once more, the letter in hand. The investigation had concluded, yes, but this letter, this warning, was a reminder that no case was truly closed. There was always more to discover, always more to uncover. The game, as it had been called, was a continuous cycle, and Poirot was always ready to play. He looked up at the moonlit sky, his eyes reflecting the calm of the night. "The truth is always in motion," he said softly to himself. "But I will always be there, waiting for it." Poirot turned away from the window, a faint smile tugging at his lips. The final chapter had been written, but the next one was already waiting to be uncovered. There was no end to the pursuit of truth. It was a journey that never ceased, And for Poirot, it was a journey he would never stop making. The door closed softly behind him as he prepared for what would come next. Chapter 17. The culprit revealed. Poirot sat at his desk, the faint light from the desk lamp casting long shadows across the room. The investigation had come to a close, or so he had thought. The evidence had been carefully examined, the suspects questioned, and the truth uncovered. Yet, something in his mind continued to tug at him, a sense that the final thread was still dangling just out of reach. The letter the stagehand had handed him earlier still weighed heavily on his thoughts. "The game is just beginning," it said, and Poirot, ever meticulous, knew that no detail could be ignored, no thread left untied. He had expected closure, a clean end to a complex case, but the letter, with its cryptic message, was a reminder that the game was never as simple as it appeared. As the night deepened and the opera house quieted, Poirot found himself standing, pacing slowly across the room. His mind worked like a clock, ticking through the facts, the players, and their hidden motives. The door to his office opened without a knock, and a familiar figure stepped in. Beaumont, looking worse for wear. His face was drawn, his eyes clouded with guilt. He hesitated at the door before stepping forward, his hands trembling slightly. "Monsieur Poirot," Beaumont began, his voice weak but steady. "I couldn't sleep. I've been thinking about everything you said, about the blackmail, about Madame Bellamy and Halliday. But there's something more, isn't there? Something I didn't tell you. Something I couldn't." Poirot didn't move, his hands clasped behind his back, watching Beaumont carefully. "You've come to say more, Monsieur Beaumont?" he asked, his voice low. "I'm listening." Beaumont hesitated, his eyes flickering to the floor as if ashamed. "It wasn't just Bellamy. There's someone else, someone you haven't suspected." His voice faltered as he took a step closer. "It was the director, the person in charge of the show. They were the ones pulling the strings all along. They made it all happen. They pushed us all to the edge. Madame Bellamy, Halliday, me. We were just pawns in their game." Poirot's sharp eyes never left Beaumont's face as he absorbed the new information. The director, the one pulling the strings behind it all? It was an angle Poirot hadn't considered. His instincts had been right. There was still more to uncover. "The director, Monsieur Beaumont?" Poirot asked carefully. "Do you have a name?" Beaumont nodded, swallowing hard. "Yes, but they're not just any director. They've been a part of this theater for years, influencing everything. The moment the power shifted, they knew exactly what to do. They knew how to control people, how to keep everyone in line. They're the one who engineered the whole thing. They even blackmailed Bellamy. She wasn't acting alone." Poirot's mind was racing. He hadn't expected the revelation, but it made sense now more than ever. The director, someone who had access, power, and the ability to manipulate the entire situation from the shadows. It explained a lot of things, the behind-the-scenes tension, the way certain events had unfolded, the timing of the sabotage. "Who is this director, Monsieur Beaumont?" Poirot asked, his voice cutting through the tension in the room. Beaumont's face grew even paler, his hands wringing together nervously. It's Martin Leroux, the head of the opera house. He's the one who put the pressure on all of us. He's the one who threatened to ruin everything if we didn't comply with his demands." Poirot froze. Martin Leroux. The name resonated with him like the ringing of a distant bell. He had been under Leroux's watch in the past, when Poirot had visited the opera house. A man of power, control, but also subtlety. Leroux had always seemed too smooth, too composed for a man in charge of such a volatile place. And yet, now that Poirot thought about it, the clues had always pointed to him. "The game you speak of, Monsieur Beaumont, was one of control," Poirot said, his voice darkening. "Leroux has been orchestrating it all from the shadows. He used each of you, manipulated your fears and ambitions to his advantage." Beaumont nodded, his eyes wide with realization. He's been doing it for years, manipulating us all, making us think we were in control. But it was him all along, pulling the strings. He made sure the rivalry between Bellamy and Devereux reached its breaking point. He set up the sabotage, making us think it was just a random act. But it wasn't. Poirot nodded slowly, the pieces fitting into place with eerie precision. The mask was never just a symbol of rivalry. It was part of a larger plan. Leroux's plan. The sabotage, the blackmail, the manipulation, it was all leading to this moment. And now, it was clear that Leroux was the mastermind behind it all. "I see," Poirot said softly, his mind racing with the implications. "And now, Monsieur Beaumont, you realize the full extent of what you've been involved in. It is time to bring Leroux to justice." Beaumont swallowed hard, his voice barely audible. "But how? He's the one with the power, the authority." Poirot's lips curled into a small smile. "That, Monsieur Beaumont, is precisely why he will fall. No one, not even someone as powerful as Martin Leroux, can remain hidden forever. The truth always finds its way to the surface." The investigation was reaching its climax. Poirot knew that Leroux's downfall was imminent, but the real challenge now was how to expose him. The pieces were almost in place, and the last step was close. Leroux would soon face the consequences of his manipulations, and Poirot would be the one to see that justice was done. The game was over. The truth would be revealed. Chapter 18. The closing curtain there in the opera house had shifted, heavy with the knowledge that the final act was about to unfold. The truth had been revealed, the manipulations laid bare, but there was still one last step to take. Martin Leroux, the mastermind behind the chaos, had to face the consequences of his actions. Poirot had unraveled the web of deceit, and now the curtain would fall on the last performance. Poirot walked through the grand hallways of the opera house, his steps deliberate, his thoughts focused. The others had been dismissed, and now it was time to confront Leroux. His mind worked quickly, calculating every angle. The director, a man of influence and power, had believed himself untouchable. But no one was beyond the reach of the truth, and Poirot had made it his mission to expose Leroux for what he truly was. As Poirot reached the director's office, he paused for a moment, allowing the silence to settle around him. Leroux had been the one to orchestrate the entire affair, the sabotage, the blackmail, the destruction of the mask. His motives had been driven by power, greed, and the need to control. But now his empire of manipulation was about to crumble. Poirot knocked on the door, his hand steady, his resolve unshaken. When the door creaked open, Leroux was standing there, his usual air of composure slipping as he took in Poirot's presence. The director's face was pale, his sharp eyes flickering with recognition. "Monsieur Poirot," Leroux said, his voice cool but with a hint of unease. "I expected you to come, but I must admit, I didn't think you'd be so persistent." Poirot stepped inside, his eyes narrowing as he observed the man who had caused so much chaos. "Persistence is my virtue, Monsieur Leroux, but it is not just persistence that brought me here. It is the truth." Leroux's lips curled into a thin smile, but it was clear that his confidence was starting to wane. "The truth," he repeated, as if testing the word on his tongue. "What truth is that?" "The truth of your involvement in the destruction of the mask, the blackmail of your staff, and the manipulation of everyone in this house," Poirot said, his voice sharp. "You used fear, ambition, and jealousy to control them. You used them all to achieve your own ends. But now, Monsieur Leroux, your game is over." Leroux's eyes flickered, the full weight of calm slowly cracking. "You think you understand everything, don't you, Poirot? You think you've seen through me, through my plans, but you have no idea what it's like to be in control, to be the one pulling the strings. You think I'm just some villain, some puppet master, but you're wrong." Poirot stepped closer, his gaze unwavering. I don't see you as a villain, Monsieur Leroux. I see you as a man who has lost himself in the pursuit of power. You've manipulated everyone around you, including Madame Bellamy Halliday and even Beaumont. And for what? To preserve your control over something that was never truly yours to keep. Leroux's face twisted with frustration. You don't know what it's like, Poirot. This theater, this house, it's everything. It's my legacy. I built it, I made it, and I will not let anyone take it from me. Not Bellamy, not Devereux, and certainly not you. Poirot's gaze softened slightly, but his words remained firm. You built nothing, Monsieur Leroux. You manipulated, you deceived, and you destroyed. But the truth always finds its way to the surface, no matter how deeply it's buried. And now, it's time for you to face the consequences. Leroux took a step back, his face paling as the weight of Poirot's words settled in. You can't, he started, but Poirot cut him off. I already have, Monsieur Leroux, Poirot said, his voice cold. Your actions have been exposed. The game is over. For a long moment, Leroux said nothing, his mind clearly racing. He seemed to consider running, fleeing from the inevitable, but something in his posture changed. He straightened, his shoulders slumping in defeat. The fight was gone from him. You think you've won, Leroux said quietly, almost bitterly. But in the end, it doesn't matter. I've played this game for years. I've made my mark, and no matter what happens now, nothing will change that. Poirot gave a small, almost imperceptible shake of his head. You are wrong, Monsieur Leroux. What matters is not the mark you've made on the world, but the legacy you leave behind. And now, your legacy will be defined by the choices you've made, not the power you've held. Leroux stood motionless, his eyes narrowing as he processed Poirot's words. He had nothing more to say. His time was up. Poirot turned toward the door, pausing before he exited. I trust you will face the authorities now, Monsieur Leroux. Your legacy will be yours to answer for. As Poirot walked away, he could hear the sound of Leroux's footsteps following behind, but it didn't matter. The game was over, and the truth had won. The opera house would never be the same, but perhaps, in time, it would heal. As for Leroux, he would face the consequences of his own actions, and Poirot would move on to the next case, knowing that justice had been served. The final curtain had fallen.